Hello, and welcome back to the Use and Abuse of Laura Endicott. This is Chapter the 12th, Fight and Flight, Scene 1. Did she actually reveal any of this to you? Philip was resting upon one arm and shoulder, caressing my belly and surrounds with his gentle broad palm. It had been several days of constant vigilance over and about Sarah, and this was the first time we had been intimate since the crisis. No, of course not. No, this time the event shall forever be hers alone to vouchsafe. Philip, I could simply have a too vivid imagination, could I not? It is in my character to make a jest at this moment. Well, go on then. It shall fall flat now that I have suggested it, but whereas you are not at all lacking in imagination, here he gestured to us in the bed, giving me a wink, enough said. I do not in this specific case think you are but dreaming. It all adds up, as the detective might himself say. Yes, it surely does, though my mind's eye of it now makes me shudder. She did it not only to protect her sister's dark deed, but as well to perhaps provide decoy, if in fact Peter had pursued his mentor's death as a case of murder. I'll be damned, yes, since I myself had just arrived. Perhaps it was not you she intended, but rather Peter himself, in order to throw the entire Cambridge force into turmoil, and thus render them impotent in the face of any yet further act she might have envisioned. Good Lord, that is a broader take, to be sure. I'll admit my admiration. What, for my idea, or for Olivia's potential scheming? Well, perhaps they are the same thing, after all. What else? She thus would increase her leverage over me as well, because I had lied to the housemaid's mother, shame on me, about her whereabouts. Philip now gave me a glum look, but I took his hand in mine. These are acts that warrant more than the cane, I do declare. Aye, as well they might. But we are adults, and we should thus face adult consequences. To that end, what on earth did murdering the inspector have to do with Olivia's personal vendettas? It was a simple extension thereof. Mudge appeared to be investigating the as well apparent disappearance of Martha, whom Olivia herself had killed, you recall. I also recall that you refused to speak of the means of that specific act. They are unspeakable, and yet they are, for me, understandable. I have already hung my conscience upon that peg, Philip, and it hangs there to this day and e'er more. By placing yourself in her shoes, indeed, would I not have acted, within my very much lesser capacities, as the sisters have acted, had I not lived as they had been compelled to live? I can tell you in fullest conscience that I would have at least tried, and again, and we have already pored over together all of the ethical implications of such. Philip now raised himself up and then splayed out his hands in mock retreat. I had no intent of revisiting any of this. I had only wondered about the modus operandi of its latest installment. Call it boy's own curiosity. Well, that is a vicarious voyeurism, is it not? Preserve it rather for gazing upon my naked selfhood, and thus survey all that is yours and forever yours, my liege. That is the most summary vision such could e'er behold, but even so. Well, I am almost certain that it occurred in this way. Mudge was atop the ridge. He looked down in his usual studied fashion and descried the body of the governess. He did not then fall off the cliff, as Peter so proposed, but then, in an orderly and systematic fashion, descended by way of the path and waded into the brush until he was beside said body. He was then hailed by Olivia, now herself atop the ridgeline. She perhaps pointed to the corpse herself, since she very well knew where it lay, and then back to herself, as it were, suggesting to the inspector that she knew something about a case now very much in hand. Mudge returned and met her atop the ridge path, and that was then when she shot out his right knee with her little revolver. My gods, of course! All that mess, that injury, was the result of her digging through the joint to recover the bullet, and thus obliterate the evidence. But why the knee? Precisely due to your sense of it, which I also take to be the truth of things upon that specific point. If she had shot him through the heart or head, she would absolutely not have been able to dig said bullet out, especially with her bare hands. Good God, yes, of course you are correct. My word. Every moment. Yes, every moment. That is Olivia's active mantra. All is planned and overplanned. Nothing is left to chance. Now, the one thing she would have anticipated, but could not entirely avoid, was the fact that Mudge would fight back, would resist, and by any means at his now lesser disposal. Her cheek! Mudge caught her in the face with his stick. Precisely so. Even so, the ensuing fight went her way, for she had her own heavy stick and knew how to use it. He would not have been able to stand, and thus in the end she clobbered him to the point where she simply pushed him off the edge, likely using her own shaft to do so. Would he not have dropped his stick in such a fight, or have it flung from his grip? How else could Olivia have overtaken him at close action in order to push him off? I have no doubt that is precisely what did indeed occur. That cannot be, for Mudge's staff was found on site, shattered, and, well, you saw the other. Philip was genuinely puzzled, but I, seeing knowingly through the nocturnal glasses of my soul's recent embrace, knew the better. Here you have not the sense of the kind of being Olivia truly is. He had struck her, leaving a nuisance of a bruise in so doing, but he left more than this, or rather, called up in her mind the more, all of the other times she had been struck, and thus violated, all those other times when she had been helpless and unable to defend herself. Thus, she grabbed up Mudge's fallen stick and carried it with her, gaining the place where he lay. He may have been already dead due to the fall, but his neck was not broken, Peter told me, so perhaps not. However may have been the case, Olivia proceeded to ram Mudge's own staff through his eye and straight into his skull, boring out a hole that she was shortly to simply reuse. Oh! The shaft had been splintered and broken, as if it too had fallen with its owner. I nodded to him with both avidity but also solemnity. Olivia extracted the stick, still whole and sound, from Mudge's head, and then shattered it over one of the nearby rocks, of which there were many, as you saw. She then cast the top half to one side and simply replaced the bottom in the socket, thrusting it down the more so that it maintained its first stiffness in its more furious entry, and thereby leaving the impression that it had travelled and shattered, just as we had originally surmised. A most convincing performance, all in all. And that is my point, my darling prince. Olivia does herself live for such performances. It is her version of the theatre in which her sister must now dwell. But aside from the legal threat of Mudge's potential future musings, you are implying Olivia was moved by more than this. What then is that more? Of that I am not entirely certain, but to me it must have to do with how she perceives authority, as in who has it, and what is its source. She too has, as has her sister, gotten something out of her, sloughed off some cross, which she had been bearing for likely many years. In killing an officer of the law, an upholder of customary value, and of the social order alike, she overcame some personal demon. Perhaps the very sense that she as a child had been a victim of all such so-called order and law. Yes, I can see that now. That is most insightful of you, my love, almost as if you had been interpreting a poem or some other such text. That is where detective work apparently intersects with my actual vocation. But as far as Olivia goes, of one thing I am certain. She would not have been able to save her sister's life if she had not previously unburdened herself of this cross, and she did so through the inspector's death. In that sense, it was, of all those she has murdered, by far the most important. She saved herself in order to save her sister. Yes, so it went, and thus so it proved. She mentioned to me just yesterday that I had gained my own freedom because of my role in saving Sarah. In her words, Olivia told me she would not have been able to call for help unless I had gotten the door unlocked. Of what nature, this help? You heard what I heard, saw what I saw. Philip shook his head slowly. An orison of positive desperation, surely. The change of light, well, that might have been illusory. Our own senses overcharged with the moment. Perhaps so. Either way, her novel and very much more material maneuver she had accomplished just before that orison began what was to be a process, part corporeal and perhaps part something other, and it was ultimately rewarded. And in the most profound manner. Philip seemed content to pass over the more lurid and speculative aspects of the crisis, but I knew him to be a practical-minded person at heart, and never did I have cause to regret this about him. Olivia had fought her fight and finally emerged victorious. She did so just in time to help guide her sister through her own. Indeed, I wonder now if the timing of such was already set, in that Sarah could not have confronted her demon unless and until her sister had done the same with her own. The War of Armont is thus concluded, Philip intoned. It was a historian's comment, but it was also far more than just that. The girls' war had ended, and they had not only survived it, but had gained all they had needed to gain in order to mature into a healthier adulthood. I shan't say more customary, standard, or yet normative, given the personalities involved, but at the same time I now had utter confidence in their shared futures, in that I realized then that my place beside them was no longer either necessary or desirable. I sank myself into Philip's chest and breathed deeply of another future, one in which I now had also what I needed to mature and mature into.